last topic of today. Unfortunately, this past week in Oceanside, California, Camp Pendleton, a Marine amphibious assault vehicle sunk off the coast of San Clemente Island, and there were 16 people on board. 8 died, 7 Marines and a sailor, corpsman, all young. The oldest person who died was 23 years old. Most of these guys were teenagers or 20 years old. And that's a really unfortunate, tragic incident. But as we know, in the military, training can be very dangerous, and these things happen. Now, there's also news that the AAV that they were in was supposed to be replaced a decade ago, but the funding for that replacement was cut. So, I don't know if people realize this. The gear the military uses is sometimes decades old. The planes that we fly in can be decades old, 20, 30 years old, just maintained over that time. And ships can be decades old. And they haven't released the exact cause of why this boat went down. But Van, what are your thoughts?
Is the recovery still underway?
Nope. They recovered the bodies, and all personnel are accounted for, I believe.
God bless them. God bless their families, man. It's tough. It's a tough one to lose when your kids go to the military, to think what could happen to them overseas. And then kind of like we were talking about with the young lady who was murdered here in Texas. What was her name? Remember? Yeah. And it's just, that's the most unfortunate, to be killed by another service member. But this is a training accident is, it's right next to it, but it is part of it. And it's why they get the hazardous duty pay. It is the inherent risk of the military. It sounds like it's preventable once again, and now this is a funding thing. What is it? Is it, we must train to do this? Are they actually training on vehicles they're going to be using when they deploy? When was the last time they did an amphibious assault? Like, how important was that training when you're behind on funding? Was it just a show of force? Do they do that just to put on, a display for anybody who might be, observing, our movement, here at home? Who knows why they do it? San Clemente Island is super popular. It's a great training, training channel that they float through and they go through. There's a lot of, because you get to navigate, like go around other vessels. Like there's a bunch of stuff they have to worry about, air traffic, all kinds of stuff. So you were at 23 when they lost Bullet 10, right? So my thoughts are, this really reminds me of that. And those of you who are not familiar, was it 2006 or 7, Matt?
2007.
2007, HSC 23 lost a helicopter and its crew. And a couple of our friends were I knew three of the four. And they had recovered some of the bodies initially, but remember the aircraft went down in like 1,000 feet of water. That's what's out there on that island. And the Navy wasn't going to recover it. I don't know. So the Navy didn't want to recover it, right? Funding.
Right. Yep.
Right. So whose dad came in? One of the crew members' parents came in, who had the resources, the funding. A single person had the funding to go recover his own son, and the Navy didn't. And it was just, for me, that's why I care if they got recovered, because the families need to know. They need to know what were their injuries that they had, how quick must it have been, or, and if they suffered, they want to suffer with them. That's part of the healing process for that. So, like you said, super, super unfortunate, but it comes with the territory. And, I got, close to 2,000 hours in helicopters, and you better believe every time I pre-flighted, every time I worked on them, every time I did anything, I was flying around, that was in the back of my mind, from my very basic training was, where's my escape? Where's my escape hatch? In the event of a water landing. Now, if you're in an amphibious assault ship, I have to assume that basic training is also there. Where's your escape hatch? Where's your hold? How are you going to do this in the dark? They train to that standard, dunker, all that stuff. So it sounds like some of them survived though, which means the training did help. But it'd be like, back to your point, to the funding and what was the cause of the accident? Was it preventable? Those are my thoughts.
Yeah, you got to look at stuff like maintenance that was done leading up to that. You've got to look at, I'm sure we'll hear stories of how this happened and if those guys that went down saved the lives of the guys that lived, you know what I mean? And how this whole thing kind of unraveled, how the events of that day unraveled. It did remind me of Bullet 10 a lot when Hilo went down off of the Bonham Richard in 2007 because they were doing vert rep training. And the question that I always ask myself is, was doing vert rep, which is when a vertical replenishment, when a helicopter pulls pallets of, whatever it is, ammo, soda, mail from one ship to another. Very common, very common. This happens every day. This is how things get from one ship to the other. So they were doing this and they went down and 4 people died, friends of ours. And so, the question is with, and I say this as someone, as not someone who is a decision maker in training, but doing the training myself. And I would think about this: is this if I died in this training that we're doing, would that training have been worth it? And you might go, of course not. But let's think about this for a second. So you've got like aircraft training, right? Mishaps in aviation, probably mishaps in aviation and mishaps in like Humvee rollovers, probably number one cause of fatalities in training. I'm guessing, but that's what my gut.
I think you're right on the money.
And then you've got jump accidents, so parachute related stuff, free fall, static line, another really big one. We lost the chief after our 2013-14 deployment. A few weeks after we got home, he was killed in a static line incident. Brad Kavner, SEAL chief. I was on that deployment. On that same deployment, we got home. He was killed a few weeks later. And
he was going to get his jump quals done.
No, they asked him to be a jump master for a training trip right after he got home. First week home, and he was killed. And it's horrible. And then you've got like live fire training, right? So you've got live fire training, and people have been shot and killed in live fire training. Mortars blowing up, tank rounds blowing up, and or like land. If you find yourself in the IZ or impact zone of rounds and they hit and you get killed, blue on blue, friendly fire, fratricide. But let's use the live. Okay, and it's all horrible, and I wish that none of it ever happened. But let's use the live fire example. You can't go to combat if you've never done live fire drills. Okay, if you're a combat troop, if you're infantry, SF, direct action, right? You can't go into combat, and that real world scenario is the first time you've ever done live fire drills with your crew. And so you do these, and people inevitably are going to get hurt. People inevitably are going to get hurt. How many times have you seen broken legs in training and stuff like that in land warfare or whatever? So you've got guys getting badly injured in training.
I don't mean to laugh. I just did it. People get hammered, dude.
So people are getting hurt. People are getting hurt. And the thing is, in preparation for actual war, you have to simulate it as close as you can, right? And those simulations, if you try to simulate war, it's going to be dangerous. And so if you try to simulate war and it's going to be dangerous, then there's going to be incidents. There's going to be mishaps. And so is it worth it? It might be. But the question always is, was every precaution taken? Was every risk mitigated as far as it could have been? And then there's still danger, but was every risk, and then you still take risk, but was every risk mitigated as far as it could have been? Were the people in charge of training doing the right things? Were they trained properly? Was the a proper?
Were they current?
Were they current? If the training calls for a 2-to-1 instructor to student staff, was that present? Who oversaw this? Was the weather green that day, or was it borderline and you went anyway?
Look at you boxing it out.
Did the METOC give a good weather report before you went? Did you say, nah, we're going in, we're pushing, we're going anyway? You gotta look at all this stuff. And if
done this a million times.
And if every risk was mitigated to the highest level that it could have been, and then there's still an inevitable amount of risk left over, and then if this happened, it's hard to understand. It's hard to comprehend and wrap your head around that these things happen. And having lost friends in training, right? You and I both the same. We're talking about in this example, the same people, right? We're talking about the same people who died training for vert rep, and vert rep is vertical replenishment, commonly used for food mayo,
Daily.
soda,
Daily. Somebody's vert repping right now.
candy bars, right? So is vert repping soda worth it? Well, of course not. Of course, vert repping soda is not worth it. But the skills of vert rep keep ships sustained for long deployments, and those long deployments put aircraft overhead of ground forces, and those aircraft put bombs on enemy, which save the lives of ground forces. So if you extrapolate this, it's not worth it. Like, that's not what I want to say. But what I mean is you accept the risk. At some point, you mitigate the risk as far as you can, and you accept the remaining risk. And I think that's what's happened here is, or that I hope that's what's happened here is they mitigated risk down to a certain level, accepted the remaining risk, and then this happened because there's an inevitable inherent danger to the job.
Yeah, I think you're on the money. I think my last two thoughts on it. I think the hydro world is a lot like the aero world. You know what I mean? Airplanes and boats are a lot alike. And so, in aviation, they say, 80% of mishaps are human error. So and, just so everybody knows, those pilots and air crews to do vert rep is it's a very simple task, but to do it well takes a lot of training and communication, and so you just need time on the stick. You need to be slinging loads, and that's why there's a currency requirement for it. Because conversely, let's say there's a ship, they need something, and they're 20 miles away, and a helicopter can vert rep it over there, and they got to be there to go kill bin Laden or whatever it is. But the helicopter can be there in 10 minutes versus the ship taking an hour. Or if they turn on course to each other, okay, they can meet each other in 15 minutes, but now they got to do an on rep, which means they have to go into the wind. They have to set their ropes, do their shot lines across, and do the on rep. Like, there's a lot of risk of two ships crashing into each other, as we know. So the requirement for vert rep makes sense. And if you're not current, sorry everybody, I picked my nose. If you're not current, hopefully it paused. If you're not current when you do vert rep, now that load dangles below you. If you have a double sling, it can be 25 feet depending on the load, how tall the load is as well. So now you basically have a gigantic anchor below your helicopter, and if your communication isn't right, or the pilot is doubting something that he's doing, and he hesitates and loses a little bit of lift and drops it all while he has lateral movement and drags that load into the side of the ship, it's like taking a dog on a leash and slinging him around. Sorry, that one's going to pause for sure. Yeah. So that's why the currency requirement is so critical. And there's a currency requirement for the daytime version and the nighttime version. And you can't even go do the nighttime stuff until you got all your daytime stuff done. And so I'm assuming Bullet 10, for example, was a currency thing so that they could be deployable, and they could, for the next 90 days, reset their currency so that they could support the fleet to the best of their ability. And every person on that helicopter was probably more than willing and able to go do that training and get the currency so they could support their battle group. And so in that way, they weren't lost for nothing, and I'm guessing that this amphibious craft, their cultures, I'm assuming, is very similar. And so I'm guessing this was a currency op, and to make them battle ready, and it's just, I can't wait to hear the stories too, because you want to know, was it human error? Was it mechanical failure? So those are my thoughts on it. And, God bless them. God bless their families, man. That's a hard one. Those are their babies, and I don't know if any of them were parents. Some of them could have been parents.
Yep. It's true. It's true. I think that's probably the right way to conclude that, is just with, our hearts are with the families.
We know what you're going through.
To those killed. It's horrible. It's really hard. It's really hard for everyone involved. It's hard for the families. It's hard for the teammates, right? Battle buddies, shipmates. And it's hard for the Marine Corps and it's hard for the Navy. And it's part of the deal, I guess. I mean, it's part of the job in the military is the risk, the risk you accept.
I'm just glad they recovered him.
Yeah, me too. Me too. And you hope it never happens to you, you know? But if you think of every time you got in a helicopter, and any one of those times could have been the time, you know what I mean? So,
and I've had mishaps. And so I've got close.
Yeah.
And you just, and it was human error.
Yeah. Yeah. Human error and accident, negligence, whatever it is, human error is the leading cause of mishaps in the military. So with that, I'm going to wrap up now. We got to roll. I encourage everybody to get over to the ScuttleButt Show or ScuttleButtShow.com and buy yourself some merch. Head over to the YouTube channel and the podcast. Make sure you hit that subscribe button and follow us for more content like this. Van, I'd like to thank you for being with me today to cover this week's weekly roundup. We will, of course, be back next week for another episode. And until then, I look forward to talking to all of you really soon. We are out for now.